Terrific. Well, good evening, everybody. I'm Amanda Graham. I'm the academic director at the Irving Institute for Energy and Society at Dartmouth College, and it is totally my pleasure to welcome you to the third in our series of Alumni Sparks sessions. So we started this series because we wanted to do two things. We really wanted to provide a way for as many students as possible to learn about possibilities in the energy career space, energy internship and career space. Even if if you're just curious about the possibilities, what might this mean? Or even if you have a specific area that you want to dig deeper into. So that was a primary area of interest for us. And then the second was we had this incredible pool of energy alumni at Dartmouth. Over 3,000 alumni are engaged in energy sectors, from government to nonprofits to industry, all across the spectrum: oil and gas, renewables, the whole 9 yards. And so they have been clamoring for an opportunity to share their experience and their thoughts with our students. And we thought, what better way to do it right now than to bring those two needs and ideas together. So this is the third in the series this spring, and we'll be doing several more in spring term, and then we'll continue as well in summer term. So keep your eyes peeled for the agenda coming up. For tonight, it is my great pleasure and honor to bring Scott Fisher to you. Scott is somebody that I know particularly well in our alumni group because he is the chairman of the Irving Institute Advisory Board, and he does really incredible yeoman's work on that. He's a fantastic leader for us and a great help to figuring out our strategic vision and working with our board. But more to the point for you all tonight, Scott is an alum from '93. In economics, and also his Thayer degree in '93 as well, and he's a grad from Tuck in '98. He is currently a partner at the NorthBridge Group, which is based in Concord, Massachusetts. NorthBridge Group is a leading economic and strategic consulting firm that serves both the electricity and natural gas industries, and within that, both regulated utilities and competitive segments of those industries. So Scott serves as an advisor on economic issues, business and regulatory strategies, and one of the descriptions of his work is that he helps companies navigate and drive industry change. And what a great moment for us to be hearing from Scott in a time when the entire energy business is undergoing such incredible pressures and intense change. So what I'm going to do is, in just a minute, I'm going to open things up with Scott. We're going to do sort of a fireside chat approach tonight. So I will pose him a question, and he'll give us his thoughts and perspectives on that, and then we'll open things up to questions in about probably 20 or 25 minutes or so. But you should not hesitate to send your questions. Go ahead and open up the chat function and send the questions over. Stephanie will collate them for me, and then we'll jump into your questions just as soon as we're able to. So don't hesitate to send questions our way whenever you want to send us a thought. So with that, Scott, I'm going to open things up to you. And what I'd like you to do to start out with is really just give us a sense for how you got launched, right? So you were 22 once, right? When you graduated from Dartmouth in '93. What did the world look like then? And what was your pathway from getting from then to where you are now?
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Amanda. Can everyone hear me? Or you guys can hear me, right? Good. First of all, it's great to be here. I know most of you are undergrads from my understanding, and I imagine a lot of you are seniors too. And I also know that that's brutal right now, and it's really hard. Both, having been a Dartmouth student and to kind of have that spring term taken away on campus is tough. And I know for a lot of people too, what was a promising job search has now become a challenging one. I actually have a son who's your age and doing the same thing. So it's tough, but you're at the right place. I mean, Dartmouth, I am convinced you couldn't have gotten a better education. You couldn't be more well prepared. And I'm sure along the way you contributed a lot to it. So it's, it is under these, granted the circumstances are tough, but it's great to be here. Another thing too is, feel free to reach out to me. I'm always happy to talk with Dartmouth undergrads on, job stuff and, to help out. One of the greatest things I think about this institution is the alumni network. So use it. Make sure you use it, especially now. So anyway, I'll spend a little bit of time here kind of talking about me to start off, kind of taking you from even when I started at Dartmouth to now, to give you what one path is like and maybe some lessons along the way. Going all the way back to when I started as a freshman at Dartmouth, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I thought it was either going to be history, and most likely a history major, and possibly a physics major. It was one or the other. And so I wanted to go to Dartmouth for a whole bunch of reasons that are probably shared with yours. It was my first choice, applied early, the whole thing. Got here, realized that liberal arts education was important to me. Quickly though, gravitated actually more to the physics end. I had strong quantitative skills. I enjoyed the analytical thinking. That was great. I was not, as Amanda said, economics. I was never economics here. I took 2 classes undergrad economics, but what's funny now, no, I wasn't economics. No, that's okay. If you had asked me maybe as a sophomore or junior at Dartmouth, and it's funny now because I'm an expert witness and often as an economist, which I am, but if you asked me back then, I would have said, oh, economics, that's a fake science. So it's funny how you change as you grow and mature. So I went to physics and enjoyed the problem solving, enjoyed the thinking, enjoyed the quantitative thinking, but it wasn't applied enough for what I wanted. And I know some of you are Thayer here too. And I gravitated to engineering, and I actually see that one of my classmates is on right now on Zoom. So David, you know the trip well because we did this together. I don't know if you were physics earlier, but a number of my friends said, oh, the engineering's great. It's applied. You're really thinking about these problems. And at Thayer, it's done in a way that really looks holistically at problems. It's not just about, let's focus heavily, narrowly on one specific thing, but let's look at this more broadly. And that's what really turned me on. And that's kind of one of the first things I'll say in the energy industry. Some of you may have done internships in the energy industry. Some of you may have done nothing in the energy industry. I don't care. Either way, I can tell you with the education you've got, you at Dartmouth, you are well prepared for this industry, because this is an industry right now where if you're narrow, there are roles for you. But as I go through my career, one of the biggest things that I found is what I do right now is different than what I did 5 years ago, is different than what I did 5 years before that. And the change is incredible. Some other industries, yeah, it's different. Some industries it's not different. Some industries it's different, but you can predict it. Here, it's difficult to even predict. And so having that kind of broad perspective, and in our industry, that's everything from the kind of technical side, not that you have to be an engineer or know all the technology, but to have some idea that the economic side, right, the policy side is huge. We're going to talk about that too. The policy side is really important. And just the general communications and management kind of skills. I mean, having that bundle is so important because you're going to need to be flexible through your career in energy. And I'll talk about that. So anyway, I was at Dartmouth. So started my major at Thayer, became a little insane and decided I was going to try and do, for those of you that know Thayer, my BE in 4 years too. It's the Bachelor of Engineering. So I pursued that, and I had an advisor who now is emeritus. So anyone at Thayer might know him, Francis Kennedy, who is just awesome. And he kind of advised me we had to be very careful with what courses you take, because if you try and do the BE in 4 years, you miss one class, you can't do it. And he was, and through that bond, it really was a great mentor for me. At the same time, I'm doing the liberal arts. I'm taking classes in other majors, which was really important. Did my thesis with Lee Lind, who some of you may know at Thayer. So he was my thesis advisor, and I did a project a thesis that looked at converting whey into fuel ethanol, which at the time was pretty, it was going on, but was pretty cutting edge. And that was both the engineering and the economics of it. So that's where I started falling into the economics. I took a couple classes, but really started picking up the economics. That was all, and my modeling was all done in Pascal, which is, like caveman programming language now. I still have the thesis, although I think it's in my basement, not in this really academic looking bookshelf behind me. And so I also, and just also, I think the other thing with Dartmouth, and some of you are seniors, but I was engaged. And that's another key thing that I would say is whatever you do for a job, it's important. It's great to say, look, at school or through an internship or whatever, I already have experience in this area. But it's more important to be someone that you can go to an employer and say, and really show that you were engaged in the community, engaged in some leadership roles, that you are someone that strives to make a difference, not just I went through classes and got A's. And I was really heavily involved in the Tucker Foundation, which I know now is kind of split into, one's the more religious, one's I think it's the whatever it is, the social, or I can't remember what it's called, but really it was a community service, and I co-chaired the Big Brother Big Sister and did some program and some other things, and we did a lot with that program during the time, really building it. So and anyway, I then did, and you fall into these things. My career path was about falling into these things, and my advice to you, you'll see how it happened. A lot of people will say, oh, have things really laid out. And other people will say, don't worry about it, just pursue, and you'll find, your interest will come as you mature. To me, it's something somewhere in the middle. You should be flexible. You should expect that you are, that what you're going to be doing 5 years is probably not what you expect you're going to be doing now. So that flexibility, that liberal arts is so key. With that said, as you go through your career, whether it's at school or beyond, build yourself a map. And what I mean by that is understand that you're not going to know what your path is, but at all times, I think it's really important, even though there's so much uncertainty out there, at all times to say, well, what are my paths? What could I do, and where might that get me given where I think I'm going now? And that's one thing I didn't do, and I got lucky. I think that, in life, it's about, relationships, and it's about learning, and it's about values, and those are all really key. And professionally, you find that having a skill set is really important, which you're getting now. Networking is another key thing, and luck too. So, I was lucky. I ended up kind of falling into things, and the path worked really well. But what I probably could have benefited from more had I not had that luck was at times just thinking through, I may not know where I want to go, but at least I kind of have a sense as to where different things will take me, so that I have those options open. So kind of build that map as you go through. And if I go this path, and talk to alumni, talk to your parents, talk to your professors. I mean, that's another key one at Dartmouth. I'm going to say that I'm kind of preaching the choir, but whether it's, my Dartmouth undergrad profs, I'm still in touch with some. When I was at Tuck, it's the same thing. If anyone is on from Tuck, I'll just tell you a quick story there. Is after I graduated from Tuck, I had a professor who was the author of the best-selling accounting book in the world at that time. And I was at my consulting firm at NorthBridge, and we had a very difficult accounting issue for a client. And I don't mean to put down another school, but the guy I was working with was from HBS, which is a great school, Harvard Business School. But I said, you know what? I'm going to reach out to one of my professors. And he thought I was nuts. He's like, yeah, like that guy's going to care. And, I sent an email, and within 3 hours, the guy wrote back with three different ways you could go about this and everything else. My point is, one of the great things you have here is a professor network that cares about you. So, ask people, try and figure out what the career paths are in your area. And I also found NorthBridge through a professor. It wasn't through career services. So, you know, rely on that. So anyway, just going back to undergrad, I was after junior year, I got an internship and I worked, this is my first kind of foray into energy. I worked for AES Corp. And I don't know if people know what AES is. AES was a company and is a company that, that is a power generating company. It's global. At the time, it had just gone public. It was, it had a number of coal plants in the US and one in the UK. And this just kind of shows you how things kind of change in the energy industry. They were not embarrassed to say that their whole company was due to a loophole in energy legislation that happened in the late 1970s. And I could go into that with PURPA and everything else. And it was the first opening of competition. And it really wasn't meant for new competitive power producers. It was legislation that basically said this was a very regulated industry. The electricity industry, you had generation and you had wires and you had customers, and it was all regulated. So you have a different service area where utility is, and their whole business model, back then the electricity industry in the US and in a lot of other places was, you know, they need to build more lines, they need to build more power plants. They would go to regulators. The regulators would say, sure, build it. You're gonna be able to charge higher rates to customers because you built the plants, and that was it. And so what happened was they realized after things were changing in the 60s and 70s, where you had some cost increases on customers due to the Arab oil embargo, due to nuclear plant overruns, due to interest rates going up and inflation, that we need to put some downward pressure on utility rates. And so they said, geez, we got these big companies out there, the GMs of the world and the DuPonts of the world that have their own power generation, and sometimes they don't need it. So let's have a law that says that if they can produce that power more cheaply than the utilities, then the utilities need to buy from them. And so what it did was it created AES, was a company that said, look, we're entrepreneurs. It was two guys. They said, we're entrepreneurs. Let's, you know, we don't need, it doesn't say we have to be GM or DuPont. If we can just get the capital and start building power plants that can produce more cheaply than the utilities, then we can do it. So it started in a weird way competition. So it was very interesting to me working there at now you have tons of power plants that are kind of operated competitively. But back then, it was still a relatively new thing in that largely regulated world. And I also did a project at the time. It was one of the first ones. They were working because they were coal. And, you know, environmental kind of consciousness was different then, but they had a strong environmental consciousness. And one of their founders ended up on the World Wildlife Foundation board. And so that, you know, that they, even though they were coal, I know it sounds crazy now, but they cared. And so they were the first to kind of work with the World Bank and the UN on, okay, we're putting all this carbon out into the atmosphere. Is there a way that we can do reforestation projects that will help to mitigate that effect and offset it? So I was one of the first ones. I was the intern that did the initial modeling of the reforestation kind of system dynamics and everything. So, you know, you fall into things. So that was exciting, and it kind of introduced me to the fact that I could see in an industry where things were different. And we had meetings over at the UN or at the at World Bank offices, and you could just see, even just in the summer, that there was a paradigm shift going on. So so anyway, I was starting to become interested in energy. I applied and went to a master's program at Stanford, and a program called Engineering Economic Systems, which was kind of a cross-taught program between the engineering school and the business school. So I had kind of classes with professors in both, with students from both. And again, it was, what attracted me was using that sort of quantitative thinking, but holistic views. And I can't say that enough. This holistic view, don't get pigeonholed into one thing or another in an industry that's going through enormous change. So it was an excellent experience for me to to see kind of, that's where I started really seeing where I mentioned before policy and where policy changes. We had one of the faculty was at the time the Secretary of Energy, and so he and some others did some talks, and I, you know, the world that I saw, which was very economics and quantitative, I started seeing where the political aspects kind of start to really play a role. And so from there, I went to a consulting firm. My life has been consulting because, again, I wanted to work in a number of different industries at the time and kind of get that holistic view. A firm that was called Strategic Decisions Group, which is SDG. I kind of was going through the question of, do I want to go to one of the big firms like a McKinsey, Bain, BCG, something like that, a smaller firm. They were kind of in the middle, so it provided a flexibility. You know, the sell of a smaller firm is it's more flexible. You can have a bigger role earlier. The sell of a larger firm is, I think, some of the reputation. Sometimes they have bigger knowledge capital kind of groups and that sort of thing. And so you can go either. And we could talk about small and large. I think there are benefits to both. But the other thing I liked about it too was it was a quantitatively kind of bent firm that did strategy work. Did some work there, did some utility work there, as well as work in insurance, as well as work in the construction industries, as well as work in some manufacturing industries, and decided that, you know, frankly, it was as simple as this for me. I could have stayed. I kind of had worked my way beyond the MBA level, but it was the work-life balance that at that time I really didn't enjoy. It was traveling almost all the time, and it was as simple as that. The other thing that I was noticing too is I had a lot of opportunities, but and it goes back to the networking. There were two things. One is I wanted to expand my network, and the other was I wanted to get a little bit more of a broader foundation of my business knowledge. I mean, I felt like I was being very successful, but you know, the different, when you think about finance, you think about marketing, economics, operations, you know, organizational behavior, all these kinds of things. The general management MBA is something that I really thought would give me a foundation, as well as some of those networks that I could really springboard from and give you just a broader perspective. So from SDG, I applied to I was thinking I did different business schools. At first I was thinking, I love Dartmouth, but do I want to go back where I went undergrad? There's a lot of great schools out there. And for me, I looked and said, geez, Tuck, I don't want to go back to the same school I went to, but to be honest, the more research I did, the more I realized Tuck really is a separate school with the philosophy that I liked. And again, I was very attracted to kind of the personal bent of Tuck and the focus on the students. And it was a great choice for me. It's a super school. I have some of my, you know, strongest relationships with people still from Tuck, and I actually guest lecture there a few times a year now. So went to Tuck, had a great experience there, met some professors who were involved in energy and other interests that I had. It was, as I said, not even the career services office. Now we're into the mid to late 90s. But it was actually a professor that mentioned, have you looked at this firm, NorthBridge Group? At this point, I realized that I really want to do energy. What I saw, again, it's about having that map. And at this point, I started really developing that map in my head of saying, all right, what are my opportunities? Maybe I don't know where I'm going to be 5 years from now, but at least I kind of know what the paths are. You know, if I go this direction or that direction. And I realized, I saw, and that's another thing, you know, not only for yourself, but look at what industries are out there. Energy, different aspects of energy or other industries. Which ones do you see real opportunity in? What is the next opportunity? Don't let that pass you by. You're smart enough to identify things that, believe it or not, people who have been out for 20 years may not see. So one of the things that I saw at the time was, in electricity especially, there were things opening up. The industry was changing. It wasn't the same regulated industry in the US and a lot of other companies and a lot of other countries that it was before. It used to be, you know, run by engineers and lawyers who were doing all these negotiations. Now it was going to competition. They were talking about restructuring. They needed business people. They needed people who could think about, problems, that uncertainty beyond just, okay, we're going to build and then we're going to do rates. So I was very attracted to that. I was attracted to the idea of a brand new market. I also knew that if I went into a consulting firm, I could see a lot of that. Maybe I'd even find some companies that were doing some pretty cool things in that I could, take advantage of. So the first thing I jumped into, and I went to NorthBridge Group, loved the firm, everything else. Again, small firm, found that I could really make a difference early on, really have some depth with what I was doing, and in developing expertise with the clients earlier. And we worked on the actual restructuring, working with our clients to restructure the industry, to make it one where now the power plants are competitively, owned, and you're competing on markets, and then navigating those markets. And that's what the early years were about. A lot of M&A work. A lot of our clients, we work with some of the big power companies, largely US, but frankly, they don't trust the investment banks. The investment banks are going to tell them, yeah, do the merger, because they get a piece of that. They liked us, we would come in. Yep, did you have something, Amanda?
Yeah, I was just going to say, so why don't you take a pause and actually describe what is NorthBridge, right? What is the kind of consulting that you do? And I think that folks may not be familiar with, with all the terminology. So just give a quick overview of, what is NorthBridge's electricity and natural gas consulting business?
Sure.
How big is NorthBridge, right? You say it's small, but what does that mean, right?
Yeah, it's so our firm actually is very small. Our firm is about 25 people. It's funny because we've always, you look at this industry, electricity industry in the US, and we do electricity and natural gas, but I focus more electricity. And most of us do now, frankly. That's where a lot of the action has been. And that's another thing, is you've always got to see, it's like that cliche that's used all the time about Wayne Gretzky, skate to where the puck is going, not where it is now. So electricity is, I think there's a lot more going on than natural gas right now. So we've really gravitated more there. So what we do is we work with clients, and we have about 4 or 5 key clients. We're sort of the CEO strategy consulting firm, but you work throughout the organizations. And then we have a number of other clients that are, on and off. Maybe we work with them 1 year, but not another year, that kind of thing. And we do everything from their general strategy, buying and selling assets, thinking about renewables, thinking about clean energy, thinking about storage, thinking about electric vehicles, grid modernization, a lot of regulatory and legislative work. As I said, policy is so key right now, and a lot of our clients are thinking about how do we help to push policy and really move this industry.
Can you give an example? I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt again, but can you give an example? When you say you do a lot of regulatory and policy work, what does that mean?
Yep.
Example of that.
Yeah. So, if you think about something like, all right, and it's funny, with different administrations, you're going to have, right now with the Trump administration, we're doing a lot more, there's federal level stuff, but a lot more action is at the state level. The Trump administration is doing less at the federal level on energy policy, but although sometimes we're trying to reverse some of it that they're doing. But the state level, what you'll find there's a lot of questions, because different states are saying, all right, we see these emerging technologies, whether it's kind of clean technologies like, wind or solar, or they're emerging technologies that can facilitate certain things, either for clean energy or for just, ways to cut costs or like energy storage, which can do both. So there may be policies out there that discuss how do we incent these kinds of technologies. How do we, for some of our clients, some of them are directly involved in these technologies, and others are involved in building out the grid to facilitate and interconnect these technologies, and modernizing the grid, making a smarter grid. So how do we, how do we make sure that that these technologies are appropriately monetized? Some of it is like climate. What's the cost of carbon? How do we get monetization of that? One of our clients right now is very interested in, and I'll give you a great example in economics, is PJM, which some of you guys know is the biggest RTO in the country, so regional transmission operator. It's kind of like the New York Stock Exchange for electricity, for an area that stretches from Northern Virginia to Chicago. And so, you know, they've got an electricity market. Well, there's a policy now that the FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, has kind of come up with that says, look, you know, if a state wants to give some type of benefit to clean energy, then in our market, our capacity market, which is one of their markets, if they bid into that market, we're not, you know, if they're getting a monetary benefit, then because they're a positive externality, because they're doing something good for society, we're not going to let you bid in lower because you get that monetary benefit. You have to bid in still high. So what happens is the clean energy ends up not clearing in these auctions. So it actually discourages clean energy if you believe in that true monetary benefit. So some of our clients, and one in particular, is saying this isn't right. And so there's certain things that you can do at the state level around that, as well as arguing at the federal level. So, you know, we're trying to sort of correct that to the degree that you say, look, yeah, I believe in that clean energy externality. So it gets technical, but this is the stuff that's like, you know, billions of dollars of value. And not only that, but it makes a difference for society. So that's a great example of policy that we do for our clients.
So you're doing the analysis, right, of what are the implications of this policy and how might you leverage it for good or for ill, or?
Yes, we're doing the analysis, and we're also oftentimes assisting the client, excuse me, in regulatory, with legislators and in the regulatory arena. So, we're not just behind the scenes analysis. Sometimes we are, but a lot of times we're also helping them too with conveying that message to key policymakers and stakeholders.
Great. Thank you. That's great. So I'm wondering if we can transition a little bit. I'm mindful of time and wanting to make sure that we have a chance for folks to ask questions. We've talked a little bit about your pathway and about who NorthBridge is and NorthBridge's role, and you've talked a little bit about consulting, right? And big versus small. Talk a little bit about how you see the job market right now in the energy space. You said electricity is, one of the places where the puck is going to, right? And so, but talk a little bit more about what you see as energy job prospects, and you've sprinkled through some advice for folks throughout, which is great. But so let's talk a little bit about what you see as prospects, and then if folks are sending their questions over, then maybe we can jump over to those.
Yep. So the job prospects of the industry, like anything, there's ups and downs in different sectors. And so you have to think about, okay, where you are. Right now, and I think you've heard this too from other people, and we are in a little bit of a blip across all industries. And I think you guys know firsthand too. So right now, what I would say is, first of all, I know some people have different kind of financial situations and everything else. But all else said, you don't have a family to feed. You don't have, certain kind of responsibilities that you may have in a few years. This is a great time to try some different things. Don't get too fixated on, I need a job right now that's going to be the job that's going to carry me for a while. This is a good time to just get your foot into the sector. So, if I look at the different energy companies out there are, and realize there's a blip, realize a lot of places aren't even making hiring decisions right now because, they can't even take someone on to take them on remotely for a few months or whatever. So it may take a little bit of time. And, as I got advice from one person on this Zoom call once who was telling my son, actually, don't be afraid to say, hey, if worse comes to worse, look, I'll do an internship for free. And I do know that I think Dartmouth has some certain supports. If you did that and you have financial issues, there are some opportunities and some funding out there to help you out. So you could do that. So what I would say is, if you were looking at what kind of companies to get into in this industry, some of these emerging technologies are really exciting, not only for the technologies themselves, but because they're forward thinking. You're going to learn a lot at some of these emerging technology companies because they're always kind of looking ahead to what the next thing is. In this industry, that's so key in being valuable. So think about energy storage companies. Think about some of these renewable developers, the wind, the solar. Right now, they're hurting. All right, the wind and solar are having a tough time because with the whole COVID situation, they've got people out of jobs, and they're also fretting because a lot of their projects are being delayed, and they have certain tax credits that if they don't get going on construction, they expire in the next year, or at least they get reduced to in the solar side. In the wind side, they expire. So look for opportunities there. The other thing I'd say is look for opportunities in some of the big stable companies. The ones, some of our clients are larger and stable because they own some of those regulated utilities that own the wires. So they kind of have an ongoing business with that, but they're also in certain markets on the competitive side. And so, you know, they do have some of this generation. They are forward thinking. The more forward thinking the company is, the better prepared you're going to be, I think, in the future. It may be riskier in some of these companies. Some of these emerging technology companies might be out of business in a few years, but at this point in your career, don't worry about that. You're not trying to find a place that you're going to be at for 5 or 10 or longer years. You might end up there, you might not, but think about that experience that you're getting. So that, I mean, that's probably, you know, my advice on looking at specific companies. The other thing I would say too, and for some of you, you've already done your, you know, most of your college experience, but in this industry, not for everyone, but a quantitative bent is good to have. So having some of those quantitative courses, and the reason for that is energy is not, you know, a commodity like it used to be. I mean, there's all kinds of different forms. It's not just about electrons and you know, generation to customers. There's smart cities, and there's all this other stuff that plays into the industry. However, this is not the fashion industry. It's still a commodity industry compared to many. So the quantitative modeling still matters, the quantitative framework. The other thing is this industry is a really high capital intensive industry. So finance is important. It doesn't mean you need to know economics or finance, but it does mean you just have that mind, have a little bit of background. The quantitative is usually helpful in this industry, not for everything, but for a lot of things.
Great. Great, thank you. So I do have questions coming. So if you're ready, Scott, we'll turn to some questions for you now to move into getting more applied. So keep them coming, folks. One specific question so far from India. India is curious. Hi there. Curious. Hey. Opportunities to work internationally, either as a consultant in the energy space or working for a company abroad. Would you be able to speak to those opportunities? And actually, the other thing that I would say is, you mentioned some areas to look, but if we're trying to get started and looking for jobs in those spaces of emerging technologies, do you have any places where you would point us, right, to go search, or any particular companies that you might flag as good examples of those? So international consulting possibilities, and maybe some specifics on some of the other sectors that you mentioned.
Yeah, for the international, I mean, you may be able to find some gems out there, but I would think more in the bigger consulting firms. And so, you know, the names that certainly do a lot of recruiting at Dartmouth, you know, the BCGs, Bains, McKinsey's, Accenture, a lot of the accounting firms. I mean, I always, because I'm old school, the accounting firms that have consulting arms, which now may be as well known for their, you know, PricewaterhouseCoopers and those kinds of companies, because what they'll do is, you know, you're going to a good firm. And they've got the connections internationally, so it kind of gives you that. So that would be, for consulting, if you were thinking international, I would think about some of those companies. I don't know that much international. Most of my work has been domestic. I know the models, the energy, you know, how the industries work in some foreign countries, but I don't know, you know, local consulting firms. If you have some connections and you know one is good, then great. Then, you know, pursue that. That could be as good, if not better, than what I'm suggesting, and a great fit for you. But but I think, you know, what I would say for some of the international is, you know, think about the ones that you know are doing work there and have the resources and everything else. You're on mute, Amanda.
Yeah, gotta love it. Thank you for your
There you go.
everybody. Yep. Here's one that came in earlier. What big energy challenge do you think will be solved by 2030?
Right. So
A little bit of crystal
that's
ball gazing.
yes. And I'll tell you right now, this sounds bad, but nothing's going to be solved by 2030. This is a gradual kind of thing. And like I said, there are always swings and changes and everything else. But the question is, what kind of progress are we going to be on, and where are we going to be? I look towards 2030, and first of all, we got a climate issue that we got to deal with. And there are a lot of social reasons that we need to deal with, which I feel very strongly personally. And then there are also some economic incentives that different kinds of companies have. And so it's a question of trying to align this and take advantage of, okay, what do different companies, are they looking for economically, and how can we kind of align policy and markets to get our arms wrapped around that. So, you know, what I've seen is, back about 15 years ago, we were talking about a carbon tax or a carbon cap and trade. And if we could do that on a national level, and even more broadly, if we can get different countries to coordinate, which we get to some degree, but not always, you know, but even on a national level, we could go a long way with carbon in the US. Unfortunately, we're at a place where it's become patchwork solutions, and it's just not working out. It's been a real problem. So I think that's one question: is can we get there by 2030? How can we come up with something that's a federal policy? I think, though, what's promising is, if you look and you think about, and we've done some thinking about this ourselves, you think about some of these technologies that could be industry major changes. You know, storage itself, energy storage is the key to, I mean, if someone can get cheaper energy storage, and you look at someone like Elon Musk, yeah, the Tesla, the car is important. And you know what? In the long run, that'll make a lot of money. But his play is probably even much more in getting cheap grid storage. And that's why he's building these Tesla gigafactories for storage. If you could figure out how to get cheap storage on the grid, oh my gosh, what an opportunity that is, and what a game changer that is. Right now, you look to 2030, and a lot, you know, there's no consensus, but a lot of projections are we're going to cut costs by almost 50%, and that's in nominal dollars. So, you know, real dollars, it's even a bigger drop. Solar is, you know, and wind, those are coming down maybe a third. Offshore wind in the last, I want to say, well, you think about the first project in the US, which was 2016, was something like $250 a megawatt hour its first year. And now Vineyard Wind, which keeps getting delayed, but for 2022 or 2023 was like 60-something dollars a megawatt hour. So we're looking at changes in costs, and they're becoming more competitive. So, you know, that I think bodes well, and that can help us with that kind of that climate challenge. So the other big one too is electric vehicles. And so, you know, electric vehicles, I think, have a lot of potential, and it's something that I'm heavily focused on right now, but it's a slow adoption. And so it's going to take time for people. Part of the reason is people keep their cars for many years, and you're going to have to convince them to buy a higher upfront cost car, which has a lower ongoing cost, but people don't always see that, as well as a carbon benefit. So these are things, though, that I could see electric vehicles really catching on, and autonomous vehicles would really help, because autonomous vehicles, then these cars, you can get a lot more mileage out of them in a shorter period of time, which actually is economically even more beneficial for the cars. So we're not going to solve anything, but what I see are trends that are going in the right direction, and the decisions are on us for policy to push it even further.
Great. Thank you. Davis has a question. Do you think that the ITC step down and other regulation changes, such as state-specific REC programs, will hurt the renewable industry as a whole? or will it lead to increased competition among developers? And if you want to go ahead and brief us on what the ITC and the REC are for the uninitiated.
Yeah, so the ITC is investment tax credit. So it started, I want to say, maybe 15 years ago, like 2005
Right.
or so. It was federal legislation, and basically what it says is, look, if you build a solar facility, then you can get certain tax credits. Now you need to have, you know, certain incomes, so you can get the credits, and there's ways to deal with that, which that's another whole fight, is they'd like to get easier access where you don't have to have income to get the credits. But it provides an upfront benefit to solar developers. And the idea is we want to stimulate solar, and, you know, it's good for the environment, it's good for jobs and all of that. And with that said, I also just want to caution, as much as I'm a huge proponent, a lot of times some policies can go too far and cause a lot of disruption too. So, you know, subsidies aren't always a great thing, even for clean energy. So it's, you know, but what it is it's a great way to get the industry going and to compensate it and monetize those clean energy benefits. So that now we're in a world where solar's taking off. It's been I think since 2005, and on average, it's gone up 50% a year as far as solar penetration in the US. And that's a lot. With that said, it's still a small portion of everything. But because of the politics and where we are, it's now that ITC level's going down. So it's scheduled to ramp down, where they're not going to make as much in tax credits. And so that's one thing. So what's happened is a number of states around the same time to kind of get clean energy going, they had requirements. So the state will say, we need X% of our electricity to come from solar, or to come from wind, or to come from whatever. And so they'll actually say, look, if you're someone who serves a customer, a utility or a competitive retail supplier, then you need to not only, if you do 10 megawatt hours for that customer, maybe 10% needs to come from renewables. Every renewable energy generator has basically gets a certificate for each megawatt hour that says, yes, this is clean energy, this is wind. So you need to also show for every 10 megawatt hours that you've got a certificate for 1 megawatt hour. And so the generator can sell those certificates. So it's a way to show that, yes, we do have this much wind, or this much solar, or this much whatever, even nuclear in some states, offshore wind in some states. And so that supports the industry. In some states now, the targets are going up to 100% by the year, I think DC is 2032. Some of them are later. Some of them aren't going up as much. So do they support or hurt the competitiveness of the industry? It really depends. And I'm going to say this quite honestly. One of the problems that we have is that when we have this patchwork solutions, first of all, I think it's great. I think we need these subsidies. We need this because it monetizes competitive or clean energy benefits. But when you overcompensate one resource, what happens is other resources can't compete as well. And it actually creates, so if you say, I'm going to do this much for this and this much for that, and nuclear is a great example. And I'm a nuclear proponent. And recently, nuclear hasn't been getting the same subsidies in a lot of places. And that's actually where our largest clean energy is right now. Now, that'll change in the future. But some of the subsidies can actually create a lot of oversupply of one type of thing, and it hurts another, and you see closures. So, you know, does it help or hurt? It really depends on the level. We need to get to, yes, carbon neutrality, or to, you know, the Paris Accord. I believe in that. But we've got to be careful in how we do it. So it's really a case-by-case basis, if that makes sense.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to take, I think, 1 or 2 more questions here. So these are ones for short, concise answers, just to squeeze them in before we get to the top of the hour.
Yep.
So I've got one that is specific to FERC, right? So the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So this is Alex's question. Thanks, Alex. In the last decade or so, FERC and some interest groups have been trying to make transmission competitive, much like generation became competitive. Like, so this is the wires thing that you were talking about, right?
Yep.
Do you think that that's actually happening? Is transmission about to change? Is it changing right now? And who are the key players? I think this is a really interesting question as we're looking at the electricity industry, right? The utility industry and how it's been changing and what's, you know, what you see as the pressures there right now. So a 2-minute answer. Scott, if you
The transmission is, they've always tried to make it competitive where they say, you know, let's suppose we've got some merchant transmission. So some private entity says, I want to build transmission, and then they could get compensated for the market price difference between one point and another because they're providing delivery of that power. So it's in a very simplified way. The problem is it's what in the industry is known as NIMBY, the not in my backyard. Trying to get transmission lines built is so hard, and it just hasn't been taking off. I mean, for years, it's such an ordeal. And so what you find is that a lot of places now, they're enhancing the capacity of their transmission lines, but you're not seeing a lot of new transmission lines built, and most is built by regulated entities. It's RTOs, or it's still where we've got the old model of the service areas. You know, the utilities are building them because they need them to meet demand. The problem is with that is that you've got a lot of wind resources. We talk about renewables that are largely, you think of the swath right in the middle of the country, going from Texas, which has a lot of wind, to the Dakotas, but that's not where the population centers are. And so, you know, we do need to build out the transmission system to hit the population centers, but it hasn't been happening as quickly as I think people would have liked or thought 15 years ago.
Great, thank you. Okay, and this is going to be our last question for the night from Nick. Nick, thanks for sending the question. So Nick wants you to get specific, right? And I would really draw here, if you can, on your engagement with the electricity industry and with the storage space. As an undergrad looking for a first internship, right? Are there any specific companies or organizations to look for that you think would make a really great internship experience, right?
Yeah, I don't know if they're hiring.
That's okay.
If you're looking for actual companies,
yeah.
I would think about, right, not far from you is National Grid is a great company. They're New York, Massachusetts, Rhode Island. They do some really cutting edge stuff. They do have some Dartmouth alums that are very high up. So that's one. Another one that's very cutting edge is Exelon Corporation, and they're headquartered in Chicago. These are companies that I think are good because they're fairly stable, yet because they own utilities, but the wires companies, but then they're also have you know, they're either cutting edge in their thinking, or they're players in the competitive environment. NextEra Energy is another one. I think so. These are some of the electricity companies themselves. Yep. that own certain fleets. Let's see. You know, there are other ones that are stable, that are large, like Southern Company and those. I would think if you're looking at the consulting firms, you know, a company like ours, we don't do internships. I mean, NorthBridge is fantastic. I'm so happy that I went to NorthBridge, and now I'm one of the senior partners. We're flexible, we're nimble, and it's great. So what I would say is, don't always go herd mentality. Don't always just, you know, limit yourselves to the names that your friends are going to. With that said, some of them are great too. So look for other firms. If you're an economic kind of consultant type, think about Analysis Group. Think about Brattle Group. Think about, some of them do some expert witness test, and those firms are doing really well. Expert witness testimony is like Cornerstone Research. There's one called NERA, which hires a lot of PhDs. If you're thinking more general management, you know, I mentioned there's like our firm is, we do a lot of strategy stuff. We kind of straddle both. We see McKinsey in the industry. We see BCG. We don't see Bain as much. Let's see, you know, so there's Booz Allen is doing some really neat stuff on the technology side. So, you know, and it ties with this in artificial intelligence. There's a consulting, one more, I'm trying to think of the name of it now. Yeah, I'll think of it later. There's Scott Madden. That's another firm that's really good. That does electricity and that kind of stuff. So, you know, there's a number of them out there.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
Yep.
That's great. What a great way to end, to sort of wrap up with a nice list of possible places to check out. And just a piece from me. I mean, I think that one thing that you can do is to sort of look at people who are at those places and see where they have come from. You can do some snowballing when you're doing your research about where to be looking for opportunities. So it's not just who the company is, what they do. Look at the profiles of individuals who are working there and understand their pathways as well, and see if that leads you to other possibilities. So Scott, before we sign off, I'm going to just hold on one sec. I'm going to ask Steph to put up our note of our coming attractions. I'm so delighted to have had you all with us today for Scott Fisher here. Remember, we are always busy here at the Irving Institute, so we've got a great discussion panel tomorrow morning on the open published book Earth 2020. Tomorrow evening, we have Energy and Sustainability Careers office hours. So if you want to have an open time to just ask questions about energy and sustainability careers and resumes and interviewing skills and all that, come see us then. And then next week in this space, we have Tom Kiernan, who is also on the Irving Institute Advisory Board, and he is the head of the American Wind Energy Association. He's got a really interesting track record. He came up through various conservation organizations, but the AWEA is an incredible force in the wind space. And so he's going to be full of insights that dig deep into that part of looking at energy. Thanks.
Amanda, can I interrupt for a sec?
Please, go ahead, Scott.
Don't miss the talk with Tom. He'll do twice as good a job as I just did, and he's an incredible speaker, and he's plugged in with so many companies. That's going to be a really key night. So catch him next week. Don't miss that.
Thank you, Scott. And with that, I would say Scott is also a really nice guy. So Scott, thank you a ton for being with us tonight and for giving us your view from your perch in working in the energy space. And I know you mean it when you say folks can reach back out to you if they have further questions for you. And it's really my pleasure to have spent this time with you tonight. So thank you again so much, Scott. Thanks, everybody. See you again soon. I hope. Stay safe, stay well. It's wonderful to see your faces. Take good care. Thanks again, Scott.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.